Alors voici ce que nous dit McKeil sur son thème, à savoir les stratégies de l'ordre international présent et passé. International relations are widely considered to be experiencing deepening disorder today. Richard Haas, for instance, argues they are defined by an increasing state of disarray. Others use the word chaos. Consequently, international disorder is gaining increased attention and interest. Yet, despite this recent interest in international disorder, in and beyond the academy, and despite the decades-long interest in international order, there is still little agreement on the concept of international disorder, which is often used imprecisely and with an alarmist rather than analytical usage. This is a problem if international disorder is to be understood in theory towards addressing its concomitant problems and effects in practice. Surely, what is often called the problem of international order, namely how to achieve it, is in one sense the problem of mitigating and circumventing international disorder. To what extent can international order be understood and explained without a corresponding understanding of international disorder? It is a curiously significant conceptual oversight in international order studies and is an important topic in light of a global scope of potential severity of deepening international disorder in practice, including, for instance, the potentiality for war and economic turmoil, among other serious concerns. As such, this speech aims to clarify and advance debates about deepening international disorder in international relations. So McKeil, identify and explore two ways international order studies can benefit from a clearer and more precise conception of international disorder. First, it enables a more complete picture of how orderly international orders have been, that is, international order studies, by focusing on the substance of orders, have tended to neglect or obscure the amount and variety of disorder involved in international orders. Second, a greater understanding of the problem of international order is illuminated by a clearer grasp of relation between order and disorder in world politics. Towards this second point, I suggest that the relation between international order and disorder has a generative and deeply historical character. I advance these arguments in three steps. First, I develop and propose an analytical definition of international disorder. Second, applying it to the history of modern international orders, I explore the extent to which there is a generative relationship between order and disorder in international systems. Third, I clarify and specify deepening international disorder in international affairs today and consider its reordering effects. I conclude by indicating a research agenda for international relations and international order studies that takes the role of international disorder more seriously. What does international disorder mean? Whereas international order has been a subject of sustained and significant interest in international relations, the concept of international disorder surprisingly lacks conceptual scrutiny. Available discussions about international disorder suggest examples such as war, revolution, and economic turmoil, but do not provide an analysis of the concept itself. The concept is often used as an alarmist provocation, but with little reflection. Its deceptively intuitive meaning, as everything international order tries to avoid, is, when examined, conceptually vacuous and murky. If international disorder is the absence of order, then it is nothing at all. If international disorder is instead that which is opposed or contrary to international order, then what is it exactly? If it is war and revolution, is it also international economic turmoil and ecological collapse? How do these distinct things fall under the common category of international disorder? This suggests that it was the emergence of the overwhelming international disorder of the world wars that gave the concepts of international order and disorder their salience and prominence in political discourse. This is indicative of a concept's relative lack of conceptual attention, both in scholarly and public discourse. More fundamentally, it is the modern imaginary of an international realm of social life that makes possible such notion of international order and disorder. This is not an unimportant point because it illuminates some of the defining features of how international disorder is imagined in the modern mind. Perhaps, most interestingly, for instance, the modern notion of international as a realm outside or among sovereign states defines international disorder as either something among states or as something breaking down and overwhelming the existence of borders and barriers delimiting sovereigns. The conventional usage of international disorder in modern discourse is to imply the negative binary to international order, its disruption or deficiency. This implies that international disorder is commonly understood to be emergence of qualities in opposition or contrary to international order. These qualities are the concept, conventional connotations. At least 6 can be identified. International instability, meaning a state of internal affairs vulnerable to violent change, typically characterized by increasing reprisals and broadening scales of military posturing, as well as revolutionary discontent. International uncertainty or unpredictability, meaning confusion as to what the rules are and what actions actors can be expected to take. A state of affairs where and when the real status of diplomatic relations are unclear among said persons, when friends and enemies become blurred distinctions and fear and distrust abound. International criminality, meaning the open or secret disregard for international law, international political discord or controversy, as in the emergence of heated controversy and disagreement over international issues, particularly ideological disagreement over fundamental international principles. International dysfunction, meaning functionality in effective international rule, norms and authorities. And finally, international conflict and violence, meaning opposing interest, real or imagined, precipitating open hostilities, ultimately in warfare. The tradition of realist international thought suggests there are the normal qualities of international affairs, which, from a realist outlook, is a realm of social life virtually devoid of order. In the modern imagination, the international realm is commonly and not unreasonably characterized as an especially disorderly part of the modern world, unusually resistant to ordering and not infrequently subject to the notably severe disorder, warfare. These notions and impressions of international disorder, particularly their realist expression, are derivative of a certain conception of order as hierarchy, the vision of international as an anarchical system of states lacking an orderer. What counts as order, however, is contentious because the concept is relative to the values attributed to it. Traditions of critical thought, for instance, view international disorder in a favorable light with positive connotations because critical outlook conceive international disorder as disruptions of oppressive and exploitative orders and generative of transformative change. As such, international disorder cannot be equated with international injustice. However, the values attributed to international order today are modern values, a defining feature of which is their progressive character. For this reason, one of the major points of a disagreement between modern approaches to international order concerns the extent to which progress is possible. Thus, disorder in this discourse, often equated with the forces of obstacles, are thought to be standing in the way of progress. This point, however, only clarifies the modern grounds on which the concept is essentially contested. While the contention among competing conceptions of international disorder is partially normative, it is also partly theoretical because different theories suppose and implicit hold different propositions about the sources of international disorder. Realist theory, for instance, suggests or implies that international disorder arises from failures to navigate power shifts under anarchy, whereas liberal theory suggests international disorder arises instead from a lack of international organization and transnational cooperation. Each of these theoretical views in this way tends to equate disorder from a theory of international relations that explains it. A more primary and less ambitious aim, however, is instead to clarify an analytical conception of internal disorder, one that is applicable for analysis of its occurrence, but does not necessarily assume theoretical explanation of it. Towards this end, it is helpful to distinguish the different senses in which the language of international disorders is often used. First, international disorder is often used to refer to the breakdown or absence of international order, perhaps most clearly, but not exclusively, in the context of great power wars, when international orders are almost entirely destroyed. Second, international disorder is often used in another sense to refer to the action of irresponsible foreign policy that contradicts or undermines order and churns up instability and unpredictability, conducts such a reckless and illegal wars or violating of international treaties for convenience. Third, international disorder is also often used in an evaluate sense to refer to the mismatch or gap between the aspirations of international order and its reality, between what people want international order to achieve and what the realities of its limitations. From these different senses, we can distinguish three notions of international disorder. First, there is the sense of a disruption or absence of ordering rules or institutions, either because they have not yet been developed or they have broken down. Second, we can distinguish the state of a broken down or not or absent order from the action of disregarding and breaking order state by states. This second sense we might call disorderly international conduct, conduct against or transgressing order. Disorder is an order which may or may not be sufficient in scope to overturn the order itself. Third, there is disorder in the sense of a faulty or dysfunctional order. This is the disorder of an order as a failure of an order to achieve its aim and purposes. An aggressive and reckless war, for example, is an instance of disorder in international affairs, but the disorder of international affairs means rather that the established expectations of behavior, rules, norms, and authorities are themselves inadequate, even when they are abided. In a sense, there are ways of thinking about disorder as an absence, transgression, or lack of order. Is a more substantive conception possible? Because Bull's conception of international order is widely employed and admired for its lucidity and acuity, his discussions of disorder are particularly relevant and can also provide a helpful set of distinctions for clarifying the meaning of international disorder in world politics. Bull's reasoning is elucidated where he says, when we speak of order as opposed to disorder in social life, we have in mind not any pattern of methodical arrangement among social phenomena, but a pattern of a particular sort. For a pattern may be evident in the behavior of men or groups in violent conflict with one another, yet this is a situation we should characterize as disorderly. Sovereign states, in circumstances of war and crisis, may behave in regular and methodological ways. Individual men, living in Hobbes' account of a state of nature, may conduct themselves in conformity with some recurrent pattern. Indeed, Hobbes himself says that they do, but these are examples not of order, but of disorder. Bull goes on to provide his widely admired definition of international order as, quote, a pattern of activity that sustains the elementary or primary goals of a society of states or international society, end of quote. As such, Bull's notion of international disorder might then be defined as patterns of activity that disrupt or deny the purposive goals of an international order as they are held to be by participants in that order. This is an intriguing definition because it emphasizes the disorder patterns of activity, although we might recognize that what the purposive goals of an order are is somewhat controversial, even and perhaps especially if we define those goals according to what participants hold them to be. Nevertheless, with Bull's approach, we can begin to derive a few further conceptual clarifications. First, scrutinizing Bull's concept further draws forward the sociological point that international order and disorder must always be thought of as international ordering and disordering as ongoing processes of activity. In practice, it is always an ongoing process of ordering and or disordering. Bull's notion of a pattern of activity is the ordering behavior. Second, because Bull suggests his definition of international order is minimal, being limited to the elementary purposes of international affairs, this implies a maximal conception of international disorder because only the disruption or denial of the most primary purposes of international society constitutes a negation of international order. While it is intuitive that less severe degrees of international disorder also exist, we should agree that logically speaking, something that disrupts or denies the very possibility of any international order counts as international disorder. Bull also distinguishes international from world order, the former meaning order among states, and the later meaning order among states and humankind in general, organized into a series of domestic orders. As such, while it is analytically as well as intuitively impossible for there to be world order without international order, it seems that international order can be achieved, according to Bull, alongside and often at the cost of world disorder. However, even if Bull helps clarify important aspects of the concept, a discussion of his conceptual reasoning only takes us so far towards an analytical definition, partly because Bull's approach is highly associated with a particular theoretical approach today, known as the English school. Critics, such as Shopping-Tang, for instance, argue that internal order is more rigorously conceived as a state of regularity among states, which suggests disorder is a state of unpredictability or irregularity. Among analytical definitions, some emphasize patterns of behavior, while others emphasize institutional rules and norms. Reconciling these, we can suggest, analytically speaking, that international orders are the patterns of behavior, rules and norms that provide international relation with a degree of stability and predictability. It is important to note that this definition reconciles ways of ordering with a quality of order, the condition of international stability and predictability. Order is both a state of affairs and a quality of condition. With this definition, we can say that multiple distinct international order exist when different expected patterns of behavior, rules, and norms apply to different sets of relation. Orders can also be nested, however, with multiple orders existing within broader orders. For instance, the international system during the Cold War was bifurcated into Western order and a Soviet-led order, but both were within the broader system-wide order of the UN system. What light can this analytical definition shed on disorder in international relations? I want to suggest first it gives us a more complete picture of how orderly international orders have been, that is, international order studies for by focusing on the substance of orders and ordering processes, have neglected the amount and variety of disorder that orders have involved and even generated. Second, beyond this, and perhaps more interestingly, I also want to suggest that greater attention to international disorder reveals its deeply historical character, where ordering institutions are shaped by experience of disorder. Thank you, Aaron, for sending me to the front line with your speech. I trust our students will ask you questions when you come to lecture to ISS next academic semester. In any case, dear Aaron, if you can listen to me when you are lecturing to your student, you owe me one.